Okay, we are about to talk about the most important story of the day that Donald Trump doesn't want us to talk about. Now, every day there are stories that Donald Trump doesn't want us to talk about, and he's lucky because we often don't get to many of those stories, like, for example, the rampant corruption in his cabinet from Scott Pruitt to Wilbur Ross. But tonight, there is one story above all others that is by far the most important story that Donald Trump doesn't want us to talk about, the biggest story. Remember the $19 trillion?
We have $19 trillion in debt, going very soon to $21 trillion because we made a bad budget deal. Now we're going to have $21 trillion in debt. We don't have any money. We have got a mess in this country. We owe $19 trillion, soon to be $21 trillion. We have right now $19 trillion in debt. So I built this some of the great assets, low debt, great cash flow, and I say it for a different reason, because that's the kind of thinking we need in our country now, or we're not going to have a country left. We're not going to have, literally, we're not going to have a country left.
I thought we weren't going to have a country left if we didn't arrest enough babies at the southern borders. But okay, so we're not going to have a country left because of the national debt. And so tonight, Donald Trump has done everything he can to make sure that, as he puts it, we are not going to have a country left because, as president, he has pushed us up to that $21 trillion in national debt, and he is now on track to reach new record debt levels way, way, way above that. The latest Congressional Budget Office projections of the debt made public today for the first time show that during the Trump administration, the debt will dramatically increase every day, every week, every year, with no end in sight. The Trump tax cuts have significantly accelerated what is now Donald Trump's rush to a fiscal crisis much worse than anything he encountered in his Atlantic City casino bankruptcies. The Trump tariffs are doing their part, too. They are already costing jobs in the United States, even though Donald Trump believed that the tariffs would save jobs. The Trump tariffs have actually created an incentive for American manufacturers like Harley-Davidson to move production to foreign countries because the European Union has announced retaliatory tariffs against the Trump tariffs on products sold in Europe that are made in the USA. No surprise that they were going to do that. And so Harley-Davidson, quite logically, cannot continue to sell Harley-Davidsons made in the USA in Europe, thanks to Donald Trump, so they will make them in some other country and then sell them in Europe. The Trump response to that, of course, is a series of angry and utterly incoherent and economically illiterate tweets. The Harley-Davidson story has been a bad one for President Trump, but at least no one's talking about the national debt. Joining us now to talk about the national debt, Ron Klain, the former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, a former senior aide to President Obama. Also joining the discussion, David Corn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, and the co-author of the best-selling book, Russian Roulette. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And Ron, it's not easy every day to try to pick what's the biggest story that Donald Trump doesn't want us to talk about. But the national debt is it, and it is going to be fascinating to try to see how the Republican Party turns around, as it has on Russia and so many things, and decides that debt is good. A higher and higher national debt is a good thing, because that seems to be the only way for Donald Trump to address it, because there's nothing they're going to do to bring it down.
Yeah, I mean, they're not only not going to bring it down, as you said, Lawrence, they're skyrocketing it up. I mean, this is a story of a promise broken and an odd promise kept. The promise broken was Trump promised he would get rid of all the national debt, total, wipe it all out while he was president. Instead, he's going to raise it to a record level. That's a big promise broken. The promise he's kept is he said his deficit would be nowhere near Obama's deficit of $400 billion. Well, he's kept that promise. They're going to run $1 trillion deficit this year. That's nowhere near what Obama did in his last year. And so I agree, they're going to have to turn and run. But in the end, right, the bill will come due. And the horrible thing about this is just last week, the House of Representatives, the Republican House, passed a so-called farm bill that cut food stamps, because we don't have enough money to put food on the table of the people in this country who lack it. But we had $1 trillion for tax cuts that are running up the federal debt. That's just a horrible set of choices.
And David, the largest foreign holder of our national debt, which you can hold simply by buying treasury bonds, is, of course, China. So as this debt goes up, as it becomes more burdensome here in the United States, China gains more and more leverage and control over the president.
This is Donald Trump's big con. You played it over and over again. He made a promise, and he caught the headlines. He will get rid of the debt and have smaller deficits. Well, you know, the bill will come due. But the thing, we're living in a time now where there will be no acknowledgement of that. Trump will never acknowledge the real numbers. The Republicans will never acknowledge the real numbers. Where are the Bob Doles of the world? They've gone away. No Republican cares about the deficit anymore. And even now, the House Republicans have said that come the fall, they are going to pass, or try to pass, another tax bill that would make permanent some of the tax cuts in the previous tax bill, and that would even explode the deficit and the debt much more than in the numbers that came out today. So they are not doing anything except complaining about spending, because that's the whole goal here. They're going to use this debt to say, well, we can't spend money on the food stamps that you just mentioned. We're going to have to squeeze Medicare and Social Security because we're going to have to be paying for servicing the debt.
And anyone out there who's had credit card debt, or this actually behaves like credit card debt. It's the most expensive kind of debt you can encounter, because as this debt goes up, the interest on the debt goes up dramatically. And Ron, that interest on the debt eats up in the budget every year. No one mentions it, but it is one of the largest pieces of the budget, getting bigger and bigger every year. And it's on track to become the largest spending item in the budget, dwarfing all of the discretionary spending in the budget. And what that means is it wipes out that spending on education, on all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues out there that all have to go into basically zero spending modes just in order to pay your debt.
Yeah, it seems like Trump is running a contest between, trying to run up the Pentagon budget and run up the debt to see which number can be larger in our budget, interest payments on the debt or increasingly large payments to the Pentagon. But look, Lawrence, I think the scariest thing of all is, we're seeing these kinds of numbers at a time of relative prosperity. Sooner or later, the business cycle will turn. And if Trump keeps pressing these tariffs, it'll turn sooner rather than later. And that means that the deficit will just explode even more. We'll see the Trump recession. It will come. And then these numbers will look worse and worse and worse. And the government will be out of dry fiscal powder to try to stimulate the economy or do something about it. So tonight's news is bad, but the future news is even worse.
And it's a very difficult subject to run campaigns on because the public does not easily grasp it, and it doesn't have any of the excitement of some of the other things that come out in the course of a day, especially the stream of Trump tweets. We're going to have to, David, sorry, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.